Hey there, and welcome to The Hash. I am Zach Seward, and I am fired up. It is Monday. We had a weekend. We got Will Foxley. We got Jen Sanasi. We got Naomi Brockwell. What is going on with the markets? Will, I'm tossing it straight to you. What happened? What's going on?
Saturday was brutal. So we saw Bitcoin dropped about $9,000 in 24 hours. And it was even like a little bit quicker than that. I remember looking at the Bitcoin price chart and it was around $54,000. And then a moment later, it was well below $50,000. On some exchanges, it hit as low as $42,000. And I saw some Twitter threads where it said there was some even bad exchanges where Bitcoin broke into the 30s, which is pretty low. The takeaway from this weekend isn't only that Bitcoin's price dropped, but also that the ETH BTC ratio rose to the highest level in 3.5 years. So taking a step back, ETH is a different cryptocurrency than Bitcoin, but it's kind of gunning for Bitcoin's prime spot as number one crypto. And people look at this ETH BTC ratio, which is the relative weighting between the two market caps, and say, oh, maybe Ethereum's becoming more popular. Maybe it'll become a more dominant crypto than Bitcoin in the future. The fact that this market cap weighting is at its highest in 3.5 years kind of signals to people that there could be a flipping of sorts, that Ethereum could become more popular in the future than Bitcoin. It's pretty interesting, and it's definitely a part of like the crypto culture war where you see these altcoins versus Bitcoin versus these altcoins. We see it play out in the price charts. Zach, I want to throw this one to you. Saw a lot of haterade on Twitter this week going around the ETH BTC ratio. Can you kind of walk us through that?
No, not really. But I can say that it was a pretty crazy Saturday to see these markets tank the way they did. I mean, it was amazing. We saw, El Salvador buying the dip yet again. We saw all sorts of stuff that was happening across these markets. As to what sparks these sell-offs, sometimes you just can't know. Sometimes you can speculate and try to put one and two together and get the three. But really, it's just pretty crazy and really remarkable to see that, still at the tail end of 2021 here, as Bitcoin becomes an increasingly institutional asset, it's still prone to some pretty sharp movements. And we saw that big time. So whether or not Ether sort of picks up the slack and sort of closes that ratio for the long term, I think is to be determined. Obviously, Ether itself has become pretty entrenched in the financial system as well, and I think we're seeing a lot of institutional Ether adoption as well from the big banks and whatnot. So, yeah, a lot of activity this weekend. Pretty crazy to see the markets do what they do, and I think it's always that reminder that we don't live in up only territory. Oftentimes down is a facet of this market. So I'm going to toss it to Jen for her take, and I'm going to shout out that pup. Look at that pup back there, by the way. That is one sleepy dog.
Oh, he's having a little sleep.
That is
so adorable.
Okay, Jen,
that's
take
really
it away.
Cute. That just made my Monday morning. So I want to talk about some of the reasons that the article outlined for this possible flippening, and it points towards Bitcoin's proof of work consensus mechanism and the narrative that Bitcoin is, the hedge against inflation. As we start to tighten monetary policies, maybe people are going to look to other cryptos. And I just think, does Bitcoin need a rebrand of sorts? It's just so sad to see this. And there's so many people who are just learning about Bitcoin, and now we're just moving on to bigger and better things. And so I don't know, what would you say to those people, Will?
I don't think Bitcoin needs a rebrand. I think that the market's still pretty small in general. If you look at the number of people who hold Bitcoin, it's about 17% of U.S. citizens, according to, I think, a Newsmax or Time publication back during the summer. That's a pretty small percentage. In the U.S. and Western Europe are probably some of the highest levels of adoption. Yeah, I know it's a pretty high number for the U.S. and for Western Europe, and you might see some larger numbers in East Asian countries as well. But if you look at the larger global map, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, crypto, all these things are still very tiny. So I think this pie has a lot of room to grow. And I don't think we can really say, oh, you need to rebrand or you need to change this or that. Like, everyone definitely has put their bets on the table. Bitcoin's very conservative. Ethereum's kind of breaking things, moving along quickly. But I don't think it's time to call for any changes in development strategy. But Naomi, what is your thoughts on that?
I think it's kind of interesting and exciting to see all this competition in money and people experimenting in different ways. And, the market will decide what it values more. And it's very interesting to watch it play out. I don't think Ethereum is going to flip Bitcoin anytime soon. A lot of things would have to change for that to occur. A lot of people are getting into crypto primarily as an inflation hedge, not as a gambling tool. And Ethereum really facilitates the latter. Ethereum also facilitates an incredible blossoming of decentralized financial tools. But the fact is, most people are quite content with their centralized financial tools. So there's still a long way to go to actually finding a use case for like the average person in Ethereum. At the moment, it's predicated on like, I want to get involved with this. I have FOMO. It's fun. It's exciting, which is great. But Bitcoin does seem to have more of a substantial grounding in necessity right now, given all the inflation going on. One thing I will mention is when you have the supposed merge of the Beacon chain, like proof of stake system next year. Right. Well, let's say it does happen next year. I have some questions about what's going to happen with that, because Ethereum Classic is still a major chain. It's like 36 or something. Like, it's ridiculously high for something that was meant to be rolled back. And then we're like, no, we're all moving on to here. People have kept Ethereum Classic alive a lot longer than I thought it would be. What's going to happen with this? If Ethereum goes over and says, listen, we're proof of stake now, you think that all of those miners are going to be like, well, I'll just throw all my ASICs out. But they're probably going to have a substantial amount of hash power still on the Ethereum network, and people are going to probably keep that alive too. So a lot of the reasoning for people keeping Ethereum Classic around, like I remember a lot of friends being like, I'm putting all my money into this, because they were like, listen, this is basically the same chain. They're going to be backporting all of the changes going on in Ethereum. So what's the difference there? It's just a lot cheaper right now. I could see a lot of room for upside. So it is interesting to see what's going to happen when that kind of splits. We talk about it as a merging, but really it's going to split into proof of stake, proof of work. What's going to happen? Is the value going to split? Like, there are a lot of things that could come into play when that does happen. But let's change track here, and Zach, I will throw it to you for the next story.
Sure thing. Let's do this. All right. Let's talk about decentralized finance. According to the Bank for International Statements, the D in DeFi is illusory. They say that decentralization is far from established in a booming multi-$100 billion sector. I think it's close to 200 billion at this point in time. That the decentralization aspect of this is not quite all the way there yet. So we're going to look at BIS. This is sort of the central bank of central banks. They obviously have a horse in this race in terms of providing the backbone of the current financial system. So perhaps not surprising that they would take issue with DeFi. But that said, some of their complaints are indeed with merit, I think. If you look at DeFi governance, you tend to see that at present it concentrates in the hands of a few. So I'm going to toss this to Will for his take. Interesting to see, first of all, just BIS talking about DeFi to the level that it did, and interesting to see their findings as well. So what are your thoughts?
Totally. Yeah, I think they're spot on here. And I think anyone working in the DeFi industry would probably echo most of these concerns, maybe just like with a few critiques or nuances here and there. But I think you nailed one right there. The whole decentralized ecosystem needs some work and needs to take like a pause, like a little break check. I can think of multiple ways where DeFi is not decentralized. Just think of how you onboard into the ecosystem. Most people have to go get a Coinbase account, which requires KYC to get those tokens. Then you have to go put it into a DeFi app. That is one major hurdle they still have to overcome, and it could take a very long time. Governance, like you said, Zach, another big issue. A lot of these projects, they have some sort of treasury allocation for the app. How is that money split out to different participants? We saw a huge flame war erupt this weekend with SushiSwap, which is a DeFi exchange. And the core team who is building the application is asking for more money from the ecosystem. And right there, you already have some issues, right? There's a core team for a decentralized finance project. So how do you square those two things together? I think there are ways that you can kind of make those two work. Uniswap has been like a very good, I'd say, like brand around how you can have like a centralized team helping with a decentralized project. But for the most part, BIS is totally on spot right now. I think the D in DeFi more so stands for uncensorable. That DeFi should really it should be uncensorable finance, because once you launch an application, it's there, you can't touch it, it's going to stay online. a lot of these things are not very decentralized yet. And I think people are kind of thinking that DeFi stands for decentralized, but it's not quite there yet. Zach, I'll throw it back to you.
We'll take the Unfi rebrand to the next step at some point. Uncensorable finance. We'll see what Unfi can do. I think the thing that you're talking about there that's really important is this word "yet," right? I think at some point there may be a future in which these these protocols are indeed governed by a large swath of users. But right now, we're just not seeing that. If you go to the governance forums and you see how many people are participating in these votes that carry a lot of significance for big time money protocols, those numbers aren't huge. There's definitely a DeFi voter turnout issue that we see time and time again. So I think some of those issues are absolutely worth bringing up. Tossing this to you, Jen. Curious for your thoughts on this report.
Yeah, I agree with you. You took kind of half of what I wanted to say. I think to achieve true decentralization, it takes time. And this report points to the different entry points for regulators. And unfortunately, if regulators come to the DeFi space too soon, it's just going to get out-regulated before we can achieve true decentralization. And this is what Commissioner Hester Peirce was trying to achieve with her safe harbor proposal. So it's feels so lopsided to me. I think a lot of these platforms need time to achieve decentralization. And I don't think they're going to get it if the regulators enter. But Naomi, I'll pass it up to you.
It's like an interesting situation because if you look at what's being said here, they're grasping at straws from my perspective. Yeah, a lot of projects could go a lot further towards decentralization, but what they're calling illusory is they're saying, well, there are a lot of people hold a lot of governance tokens. They have a lot of say in this. There are some devs that have more power and are contributing more than others, and then they say this element of centralization can serve as the basis for recognizing DeFi platforms as legal entities similar to corporations. And they can then, register as limited liability companies, for example. I think that's such a backwards way of looking at all of this. And I want to go back to what Brian Quinten says, like months and months ago. He was the former CFTC commissioner, a very pro-crypto person. And he said, from my experience, fraud, like if we're talking about regulating these things, it's generally like consumer protection based. It's usually, how do we protect people? How do we stop fraud? All of this stuff. So Quinten said, from my experience, fraud usually involves a level of centralization and control as well as opacity. Query if those two conditions exist in true full DeFi systems. If not, how does the idea of investor protection change or shift from the government's to a participant's prerogative? And I guess my issue with all of this is that if you have these transparent things all on chain where you can actually see how decisions are being made and people have, governance tokens which literally are just fed into these systems of change within the code itself. I don't understand what role like an LLC would even have in this. Why do we need one when all of that is on chain and completely transparent? You're not protecting people from fraud. They can see everything that's going on and it's a completely voluntary thing. You get into these things, you understand exactly the mechanism that's going on because it is all transparent. Like I think that the government here, now we're switching the narrative. We're switching the goalposts. It's no longer, well, we want to protect consumers. We're going to regulate these entities because they're opaque. So we're making sure they're doing things by the book, by filing all these right reports. No, it's like all open. We don't need that mechanism. So now it's changing to be like, oh, well, this is fraud related, or, they can still be companies, or they're still kind of centralized. Like it misses the whole point that we're taking the middleman out of the equation. We don't need the government to come in and regulate this stuff anymore. But Zach, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about like if you applied that on-chain standard across all decision-making bodies in the world, what would it even look like? Would it be just as centralized as we now are able to see from these blockchain data? All right, we're going to take a break. We are going to hit a pause button. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Facebook, Meta, cracking down on revenge porn with some cryptographic technology. What? All right, stick with us. We're going to talk about that after the break. It's The Hash. Happy Monday.
Hi, I'm Nikhilesh Day, CoinDesk Managing Editor for Global Policy and Regulation, and you're watching CoinDesk TV.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to The Hash. We're going to dive into what's going on with SushiSwap. We alluded to it at the start of this show, but there is a lot of drama happening there. So the current CTO, Joseph DeLong, has threatened to quit unless the current team gets more support. If you dive into his giant Twitter thread, he kind of dives into the details. He says there's a lot of defamation going on there. There's a lot of misrepresentation of how things are happening. I mean, SushiSwap has always been mired in a bit of controversy. It started out literally as like a vampire mining tool. They wanted to suck all of the liquidity out of Uniswap. It was basically just a fork of Uniswap. And then after it got all of the liquidity, everyone was like, oh my God, there's a flippening and then a flip back. And then they're like, what's happening with this new protocol? You had the head of it, Chef Nomi, this anonymous figure, say, all right, well, I'm going to run off with all the money now. And everyone's like, what? And so you had like $14 million like disappear. And then you had him, like everyone hating on him. So he's like, all right, here's the money back, but I don't want control of this anymore. And, you know, I don't even want a reward. Like, I don't want anything. Here, Sam Bankman-Fried, you take everything. So then Sam Bankman-Fried like kind of manages the split key scenario where they're managing all of the treasury reserves so it can go to developers. And there's someone else called OX Mackey comes in and he's running things. He announced his departure a year later. It's a very controversial. So I want to dive into the details of what's going on with this current story here. You have DeLong basically, I mean, what he outlines seems like such a pattern in the crypto space. I've seen so many examples where you have people freely giving their time. Like, first of all, a lot of people literally freely giving their time to these crypto projects who are just donating their time. And then the community comes in and just hates on them and just epically like bullies them. And it happens all the time. In this case, DeLong was getting a salary, but as he mentions in his Twitter thread, he had to take a giant pay cut to when he left Dapper Labs to come in and take the reins at SushiSwap here. And he just says, listen, I'm exhausted. You guys are just nonstop bullying. We're trying to launch products. All you're doing is just like, it's amazing what kind of a culture emerges when you have all of these anonymous keyboard warriors out there feeling so brave, hating on the people who are trying to, you know, build projects. So basically his takeaway is, I'm going to ship Trident, and if you don't give me the autonomy to continue operations, the capability to form leadership and increase conversation across the board, I will leave. Because he just says it's not worth it. These projects are exciting. They want to build the decentralized future, but it's just so unpleasant to constantly be hated on by the community when you're just trying to do your job. So it's a very interesting situation. In a lot of the responses, like he says, he'll peacefully go, you know, you guys can go and find someone else to bully. All these people in the comments, you had so many haters being like, yeah, I've lost faith in you. You should leave. And he's like, okay, I will. It sucks to work here. That's literally what the thread's about, guys. So I kind of wanted to dig into this and also through the lens of this decentralization versus centralization. If you look at what he's saying, you know, he wants autonomy to continue operations. He wants the capability to form leadership. Like all of these words, I'm sure a lot of people in the decentralized words are like, oh my God, this is not the decentralized thing we aspired to. But there's a trade-off there. So Will, walk me through like what that trade-off is and what we're kind of seeing in the DeFi world through these projects and stuff.
Totally, yeah. Just to take like a 30-second step back, SushiSwap is a project like Uniswap that you said like launched in 2020, kind of had this famous backstory, a lot of bitter infighting between multiple key players in the crypto ecosystem. And it's developed into its own project over the last year, 2 years or so. But it doesn't mean that a lot of this controversy has left the platform at all. Joseph DeLong came in as a CTO. He was a big hire for the SushiSwap community because of his past experience working on ETH2 development clients, a lot of just different projects around the space. And they brought him in to kind of formalize and professionalize SushiSwap. Before that, it was just kind of this ragtag joke almost, where it's like SushiSwap versus Uniswap, this token versus that token, this community versus this community. And DeLong came in to kind of fix that up. And they've had nothing but issues, it looked like, since that's happened, not to his fault, but just because this community can be a little rabid at times, it seems. He's asking for more compensation, and he's asking for more leadership and more professionalization across the board. He said in that tweet that he wanted SushiSwap to be run more like Uniswap is run, where there is like the protocol is launched, there's a governance token, And then there's also Uniswap Labs, which kind of leads development for new iterations of Uniswap, like we saw with Uniswap v3. So he's asking for a very similar model that's already tried, tested, and true and is out there. The pushback, of course, is people saying, do you really deserve this compensation? Have the projects that you've shipped or the products you've shipped really been that good? And of course, a lot of these people in the community are going to ask and be very skeptical about how money should be spent, because it does come from a treasury. And also, if you spend money from a treasury and it's denominated in a token of that project itself, then everyone takes a haircut when someone sells. So there's even more kind of pressure on the developer community to get this right. I think we're not seeing the end of this. I think this is only going to keep going. And just like you said, Naomi, this is about centralization versus decentralization. If SushiSwap professionalizes more, it becomes more centralized and it can become more beholden to gatekeepers like the SEC or elsewhere. If it keeps going, though, in this decentralized fashion where there's not much leadership, well, it might fade into irrelevancy because there's not anyone calling the shots. Zach, I'll give it to you for final thoughts as we kind of close up.
So I missed all this drama this weekend, but I think you're right to look at this, right? So decentralization exists on a spectrum, and some things about decentralization are really great, and some things really, really suck. And I think what we're seeing here is an articulation of the things that suck. And so for that to spill out into the open, I think is good for the space to reckon with what it looks like to run a project efficiently while still holding the ethos of decentralization near and dear. So it's interesting to see like these conversations take place with nuance, even if they can be ugly and toxic and scary at times for the people involved. But I'm going to be watching this one closely to see what comes of it, right? If there's going to be sort of a new standard for how to run a decentralized finance project that comes out of these conversations, I'm not necessarily hopeful or optimistic that will occur, but I think it could occur. I think that would be really interesting for the space to sort of grapple with across the board outside of just sushi land. So that to me is interesting. And this one will probably stay interesting for the foreseeable future. I think we're going to change gears, though. Let's toss it to Jen. Jen, what do you got?
All right. We are heading to the world of Meta. So Meta has announced that they worked with UK-based nonprofit Revenge Porn Helpline to build a tool that lets people prevent their intimate images from being uploaded to Facebook, Instagram, and other platforms without their consent. So this is really interesting. This is a project that was revived. I think it was started in 2017. And the way this works is that if you have intimate photos that you think someone is going to upload to a social platform or an adult content platform, you can upload it to this nonprofit website. It gets converted into a hash and shared with 50 different companies. Those companies have that digital fingerprint, and if that photo is uploaded, they have a content moderator go in, ensure that the content is actually violating the policy, and then they remove it and block it from being uploaded again. So a little bit of a mouthful there. I think there are several different ways to maybe poke holes or get around this, but I think it's a really great first step for preventing revenge porn, which has led to even in Canada, a lot of mental health, a lot of really prominent cases that have to do with suicide when it comes to teenagers. So I think this is a good step in the right direction. But Naomi, I will pass this down to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that is very interesting. There are so many interesting use cases for cryptographic tools, and this kind of hashing of images is one. The way they're doing it is quite privacy preserving. So this has been hashed on the client side inside the browser. So you're not uploading your image to a centralized database where like your nude selfie is going to be in their database. You are keeping it on your system. The browser's converting it into a hash, and then that hash is what they're storing. Even so, it's a lot of trust required for them to store that hash, and then they're comparing the hash with its appearance on other websites. They can take them down. The problem with hashes is that you tweak the photo even like you take out one pixel and it's a completely different hash, right? So this could just lead to a game of whack-a-mole where people could just like alter the picture a tiny amount and, put it up, and it's just going to be like this game to catch up to make sure that they're getting it off all these websites. But it's definitely a step in the right direction. I can definitely think of different ways where we could help that tweaking scenario, and I'm sure that they will start to evolve over time. It reminds me also of what's going on with Apple. They're releasing iOS 15. We thought that they weren't going to go ahead with all of the client-side hashing of photos. It turns out that they're like, oh, no, actually we are. So it's, and Snowden wrote this big op-ed on his Substack about it, just saying how this is a terrible slippery slope, because although, this here is quite different. The Apple thing, it's about like your personal device and them installing software that's going to do it on your behalf. This one's a voluntary process. This is you saying, this is worth it to me to upload my picture and get this hash to get it down, because the alternative is like devastation and suicide. So I think that this is great. But I think that we need to have a long conversation about like the hashing of photographs, private property when it comes to photographs, how much corporations should be able to get involved with all of that. Just an interesting conversation, but definitely interested to see where this goes. Zach, I'll throw it to you for your take.
Yeah, I'm glad that the privacy preserving techniques are in place here, because it does seem a lot to like ask like a prospective victim in this instance to take that second leap of faith and like send a photo to some scary nonprofit that's going to then hash it and then cross-check it against Facebook, which we all know has had its issues in the past with data sensitivity. So I'm glad that, thank you for digging into that and explaining that, because I think that was the biggest question for me. It's like, why would I do that? Right. Like, why would I send my nude to someone who's working with
someone
Facebook?
Else.
Text me like that. That whole thing, that sounds scary to me. So I'm glad that they're thinking through that. And, I'm glad that we're going to see more of this. There's a lot of talk about like ZK rollups, right? The way that you can prove something is true without having to prove what's inside the thing that is true, right? And so I think we're seeing interesting applications of that. And if this is something that can fight this particular problem, then I'm all for it. I just don't want to ask asking potential victims to then, make that leap of faith and then trust some other third party to deal with their private information correctly is a little iffy. So hopefully they've ironed out those kinks, but I'm going to toss it to Will. Will, what are your thoughts?
I guess like the promise of cryptography. Sorry, nice. Monday is interesting here. But I want to note what Jen said. Like, if you change the photo even just a little bit, that changes the hash a ton. So then that's like a very easy way to get around it. And so you'd never be able to find the photo. So it seems like there's a lot of potential loopholes on the tech side here.
Mm-hmm. It is a way to get around it. They noted that in the article. And I think it's just going to be an iterative process. I mean, it also sounds a little slow to me to have human being content moderators then go in and check that the image that matches the hash is actually one that violates the policy, because you can imagine people taking advantage of this system and just uploading any kind of photo, and that photo is then hashed and then removed from social platforms. So I think there are going to be a lot of bugs to work out, but at least they're thinking about them. Will, before we go, I need to tell you that the people on YouTube are concerned that the pumpkin is still in your background.
I was thinking about that for today's show, and I touched it, and it's not rotting, so I decided I'm going to keep it. I kind of like it, so you should probably Christmas tree inbound soon.
Go with the times.
And then I'll put the pumpkin underneath the tree.
Yeah, it's December.
Nice.
Oh, I'm so against this.
Do what I want with it. Sorry, Jen.
Wow.
Right. Don't be sorry. I don't off mind. The island. I like pumpkin. I'm just the middleman here.
Okay. Don't shoot.
Good work. That was a good update. That was a good report from the YouTube comment section. Thank you for that, Jen. I appreciate that. Will consider your holiday decorations, please, sir.
I'll consider.
All right, good times. That was the hash for Monday. Where the hash is brought to you by CoinDesk TV, where we talk about the things that are happening in crypto news that you need to know about. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. There was a verdict in the Craig Wright trial. Check that out on CoinDesk.com for the latest, really interesting development in something that has captured the attention of many. So check that out. CoinDesk.com has the latest breaking news. We'll be back tomorrow with the hash. I'm Zach Seward. We got Will Foxley, Jen Sanasi, Naomi Rockwell. That's it. We'll just do it again tomorrow. It'll be cool. All right. Thanks, everybody.